Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald! Timber!
From inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal. From inside the centre. I can't believe
that. Good time of day, everyone. Welcome to episode 191 of Americans Watching the Footy, our round 18 recap. I am Benjamin Castle, coming to you from San Diego.
I am Ethan Castle, coming to you from South San Francisco.
Where's our executive producer?
Sleeping next to me.
Very good.
His name is Brian Harambe.
So, Ethan, how do you feel about this round in general?
Positive?
I mean, from a ladder standpoint, I could definitely understand why.
I mean, aside from Hawthorn winning, it was also just a very good round in terms of, what I wanted. Carlton lost. Collingwood lost.
Honestly, the Hawthorn win helps.
It does, but I'm mixed about it.
It's amazing that the gap between first and second is bigger than the gap between second and 13th. We have 6 rounds to play, and that's the case.
I think things are getting pretty pointy.
Oh yeah, we're at the pointy end.
I don't know what I'm going to remember this round for other than tribunal stuff, as we'll get to. It just seemed like, a pretty ordinary round in terms of a mix of interesting games and blowouts. I mean, there was no, down to the wire game, but there were a bunch of games decided in that about 15-point range that were compelling throughout.
By the way, the closest season before this one that I can find in terms of 2nd through 13th after round 18, gotta go back to 1997, one of the closest seasons on record, where it was a 12-point separation. And remember, that was with just 4 rounds to play in a 16-team league.
Do you have any other, overarching themes for the round? I feel like this was just in a lot of ways, just a pretty conventional round.
I think I'm trying to suppress my feelings right now. Lie to myself about reality. Smile through everything. All the bad things. I'll just pile them away in a place that'll come back as, I don't know, rage. Fuck you, Michael Christian. As for my team, while they lost, they did a lot of things a lot better against a quality opponent, but that's at the very end of the round. Let's start with Ethan's lock. Collingwood 10-11-71, defeated by Geelong 13-13-91. Congratulations to Rising Star nominee, penultimate draft pick, Lawson Humphreys, who got 0 coaches' votes.
I will say this. Normally, a guy racking up a bunch of uncontested disposals doesn't rustle my jimmies, doesn't tickle my giblets. But in a game without a lot of, consistent individual standout performers, I think he kind of scores some more points just off of the way this game flowed. Jamie Elliott took a hanger over him and kicked a goal that gave Collingwood a brief lead midway through the third. Actually, it lasted for a minute. Tyson Stengel was 9 minutes of clock time later. He put Geelong in front for good, but that did not bother Humphreys at all. He just took it and rolled through it. I would even go as far as to call him best on ground, just because nobody out of the midfield group really dominated. Although I do want to give a lot of credit to Jack Bowes. For 3 weeks in a row against better competition, he's played pretty well, and that's coincided with Tanner Brunn's absence, which I do not think those two things are correlated. I would think those two things would actually work against each other. I had said Bowes had been really good against inferior teams and struggled against better ones, and now he's playing better against good teams.
Meanwhile, it looks like the coaches gave a lot of credit to Patrick Dangerfield. He led the coaches' votes over Brian Myers. I mean, Dangerfield's burst and contest wins definitely were important. I thought Myers, though, had the more consistent game overall.
Looking at visuals versus actual numbers, Brian having 4 tackles, they all made his highlights because even though he didn't rack up that many, he's just a really solid tackler despite being one of the more undersized guys.
Underrated tackler, underrated handball, especially off stoppage, that's valuable. And we have seen a bit more of that. I think still they need to figure out how to exactly split his time with Sean Manna.
Yeah, shame on Sean Manna for only having 4 tackles this game. I now expect 14 every single week, and anything less brings great shame. But back to Dangerfield, just that ability to burst out of the middle combined with his physicality. You see how much better the midfield is with him in there, even if his numbers aren't huge. And sure enough, as a team, nobody got to 30 disposals. You had Myers and Holmes at 27, Stewart at 26, and then Bowes 24, Humphreys 23. Cats jumped out with 3 goals in the first 2 minutes of clock time and then just started dropping everything. Could not mark. Turned into a pretty good stretch of back and forth play and then took control late in the third. Never really let Collingwood make that push in the fourth, even after Steele Sidebottom opened the fourth with his first goal since the grand final. It was a Ollie Henry snap. He was the sub, by the way. Came in for Shannon Neal, who kicked a couple early and then faded. Also, Neal got hit in the throat, so while I think this was a tactical sub, might have had some medical seasoning to it. Yeah, that's what I'll call it. Ollie Henry's goal with 10 minutes left was huge, and then even though Jeremy Cameron missed with 7.5 left, put the lead out to 19 points. That was important, and Collingwood never really had a chance from there. The way the Cats played out this fourth quarter, this was like a testament to their match simulation stuff, because you had a team that was like content with chewing up clock, but also wasn't abandoning opportunities when they were there. Let the game come to you, control the pace, but also once there's an opportunity, go. And they did that really well and just never let Collingwood make a late push. Let's talk about both Camerons. Jeremy missed a couple of really easy shots and finished with 3-3 off 9 disposals, but also kicked a couple of really difficult goals. This isn't something you normally expect with him, but he struggled with the easy ones and nailed the difficult ones.
It's very Danaher-like.
Except it was less set shots and more like tough shots from open play. And then Darcy Cameron, 58 hitouts, so tremendous fantasy value there, but only 4 clearances and 13 hitouts to advantage. I'd say limiting him to 1 out of every 5 to advantage is decent, not amazing. Like Sam DeConing only had 7 hitouts, but 3 to advantage. I think like the hitout to advantage ratio, when it's above like 25%, that's notable. And when it gets above like 30%, we're really talking. So to keep it at 22%, it never felt like, oh, fuck, we don't have an answer for this guy. Never felt that way.
I mean, it just felt like they were thinking of him as Dave Matthews or something. They were crashing into him constantly. And that limited the clearance effectiveness enough, I would say. So it's a decent strategy as a stopgap. So would you advocate then for more of a split for blitz odds instead?
When you're facing guys that are more mobile ruckman, I think the situation calls for blitz odds. When you're facing the more like Jared Witts, Riley O'Brien types, then I think that's the right situation for Toby Conway.
Unit lost.
Collingwood just struggled with Geelong controlling so much uncontested play, which was interesting because this is something that the Cats don't usually do.
Yeah, Rowan Connolly pointed out on Twitter, Geelong are 16th in terms of uncontested marks and uncontested possessions. So a change of pace there. You combine that with Collingwood having been pressure averse in the couple weeks without Beau McCreary, and it added up to the solid game plan from Chris Scott that Collingwood just didn't seem willing to counter. Who will live for the Pies with McCreary still out potentially for another month or so? There's got to be some more ground-based solutions there. I think Lachie Schultz and Pat Lipinski will both need to have big parts to play in that.
Lipinski started hot and then really faded. Schultz got subbed off, kind of had a head clash with Tom Stewart, who I'm surprised left with just bleeding over his eye. And as of now, no further symptoms. Knock on wood. Hopefully stays that way.
Yeah, I do believe Schultz is in protocols. And he'll still catch strays this week because Collingwood will be playing Jack Ginnivan and Hawthorn. That is a juicy Saturday standalone game. On the note of Stewart, before we transition to talking about Hawthorn, Stewart had the Scott Pendlebury matchup and limited him again. That's, 3 damn solid weeks in a row as a limiting midfielder for Stewart. And also, Geelong continues to be Pendlebury's kryptonite.
14 disposals. He has played 3 full games since 2010, which he hasn't been subbed out, where he's finished with under 15 disposals. and they've all been against Geelong. The stat courtesy of Daniel Cherney. Nick Dacos, let's mention him briefly.
No coaches' votes. No tag. Hot start. Faded in the second half. Looks like Pies fans in general have preferred Darcy Cameron's role to Nick's in terms.
I actually still thought in terms of impact, he was their most significant, and not just because of volume. The problem with not tagging him, while it ended up working out, I think Tom Atkins did limit him some. The problem is what happens if you let him have open space. He is really good at taking advantage of open space, and he did that a few times, but then his impact got minimized. Also, I thought John Noble was quietly pretty good. But we were talking about pressure for Collingwood. Who had the most pressure acts for Collingwood?
It must not have been one of the two players I mentioned.
To borrow from those clickbait links you see at the bottom of some article, the answer will shock you.
Was it somebody like Pendlebury?
No, he was one off the lead.
It was?
He had 21. Who had 22?
Someone like Joe Richards?
Nope. He had 19. I did think he was one of their better players.
Might need to make up for Schultz in terms of some of the pressure acts. Who is it, Ethan?
Ned Long, who only had 9 disposals, but I thought actually had a pretty decent impact.
Yeah, first game in the 22, and he showed why he should stay there. Get him a bit more of the ball as well, and maybe he could be part of the aggregate solution to make up for McCreary.
Early on, Geelong were some of the kicks in like their back half that they were telegraphing and were kind of leaving susceptible to pressure. You know, they were able to figure that out as the game went on, but I don't know if you're able to do as much of that if McCreary's in there.
In Launceston, Hawthorn 13-9-87, defeating Fremantle 10-14-74. A 5-goal-to-1 final term for the Hawks, and they are still in 13th. That just shows you how crazy the start of the season is, and I guess how damaging those 5 losses right at the start were. They've now won 8 of 10, and one of the big factors that helped them in the second half was a move forward for one James Sicily. He diagnosed himself in the postgame as a defensive liability. So he and Sam Mitchell pulled the trigger, moved the magnet, and worked out. I was surprised it worked out so well. Also, Nick Watson taking a pretty difficult boundary goal at the end, too. The game was probably over at that point. That was what put them up 14 with a couple minutes left, but notable still that he hit a tougher shot.
There are 26 million Australians, and Nick Watson is now going around the country to shush every single one of them individually.
He and Jack Ginnivan could have quite an act with that. And maybe they'll just shush Collingwood after every single goal this week as a whole team. Is that the move?
Bobby Orchol doing it down 9 goals at Geelong was pretty funny. It's like, you know how people kind of made fun of like JJ McCarthy and how he looks like he's, you know, someone who always says tonight's going to be a movie. I get that same sort of vibe off of some of these younger Hawks. Yeah, Sicily coming back from what was his injury?
Dislocated shoulder.
Yeah, I think that affected him in defensive contests. You know, normally, he's both a solid one-on-one defender and a sweeper, but yeah, he was struggling like with Josh Tracy in particular. So yeah, they slid him forward, and it worked out, which is funny. You would think, you know, you need your shoulder to mark, but he was able to still like get the spatial positioning he needed.
I mean, that could be more of a full arm thing, not necessarily higher up. The shoulder, I think that's really largely affecting spoils.
If you were to pick on the deserve to win-o-meter or winometer, I'd probably put Freo around 55%. But I think they controlled more of this game. But it was an interesting matchup where, I know you noted, nobody had 25 disposals. Your leaders at exactly 24 were James Worpel and Will Day.
First game without a 25 disposal performance since round 2 of 2016, Lions and North. That just strikes me as a rain game.
It's funny. I forget who had tweeted it, but as I'm like getting settled in about to watch Friday night, someone had said it never rains for Tasmania games, which is funny because Tasmania is known as a rainy place. But yeah, once again, it was just like perfect conditions.
Cold, but clear, dry.
Yeah.
From what I watched of this game, I was intrigued by the ruck battle between Luke Jackson and Lloyd Meek. I think Meek got enough of the wins later to help turn the game in Hawthorn's favor. I would give him a slight edge overall, and the coaches seem to agree. Meek got 4 votes.
I would chart that up as about a draw.
Was it the timeliness of his wins?
No, it was just two different styles. Meek winning more of the hitouts, 51-31. Jackson getting to 20 disposals and some effective forward time. Champion Data agrees with me. Hayden Young being best on ground.
No votes.
I don't know how you give with that. That's a huge oversight. Hayden Young had 20 disposals, 8 contested, and still racked up 90% efficiency, 4 assists, and he had 8 tackles. It was just like a very Hayden Young game in terms of talking about a guy who utilizes space really well, but he didn't always get a ton of support. Like Caleb Sarong's effectiveness faded. He still got, I think it was 7 clearances, but was limited. Hawthorne definitely made Heath Chapman less effective, put him under some pressure. Luke Ryan's impact continues to be minimized, which mostly just hurts my fantasy team, although I did win this week. This was a game where they definitely missed Darcy. I think Darcy would have been a more like-for-like matchup for Meek, and it would have let Luke Jackson have more time forward, which they needed, especially on a day where Sam Sturt vanished and ended up getting subbed out. Although I do like Patrick Voss. I think he's a really interesting player that you could swing into either 50 with his marking skills.
Voss came in after a 6-goal performance in the Waffle, and while I get having another forward in there, I feel like it also might have muddied things up a little bit when Jackson was trying to push as well. Sturt's a medium tall. He got Tracy in there as well. I think the more suitable thing to do would have been to get another player leaning more toward Ruckman in there. And they do have a potential answer for that in Liam Reedy, who has yet to get an AFL debut. If Darcy is to remain out at all, I'd like for them to try Reedy over Pat Voss.
Ultimately, the guys who stood up as this game went on were Connor Nash and Will Day. Day, a pretty consistent performance. Then Nash quietly ended up with double-digit clearances, and I thought this was probably his best game of the year. He had one other that I had liked a few weeks ago, because he had started the year quietly and has definitely proven that he benefits a lot more from Day being in there with him. I want to say it was the Richmond or GWS game or something.
I'm thinking it's the Giants game, which was also in
Launceston. His physicality ended up becoming pretty impactful, and it was a reminder of how good of a part of this midfield core he can be, because at times this year he hasn't been quite up to that standard. And scary is the team has still done quite well, even as he hasn't been up to his usual performance. It's just dang, what can you do if you really get him clicking? But this was another one of those games that I kind of characterize as pretty even, and the difference ends up being just who takes advantage when they're in control, and the Hawks did that by kicking the final 3 goals. Cal Sherdeer, once again, affecting contests even when he wasn't marking. His presence in a 2-on-2 contest got James Sicily the go-ahead goal. Then Sicily marked one with 3.5 left and scored to put him up 8. And then Nick Watson, if it wasn't over before that, kind of flew for a mark along the boundary, actually kicked a goal, and that was it. Hawks snap a 6-game head-to-head losing streak. And I think just they were the more opportunistic team. And it's not just they kick more goals, Dockers kick more behinds. Although Patrick Voss kicking 1-3 definitely hurt. Same with Jai Amos. And it was a quiet game from Michael Frederick. I feel like, especially when you're considering the defensive struggles that Sicily had, if you'd gotten a better game out of Michael Frederick, I think this might have been a different story. The nature of this game, it was one that was less dominated by individuals, but guys had their moments. And I think the quiet contributions over these last couple months of Josh Weddle and Jack Scrimshaw should be mentioned.
If you were to think of a Hawthorne defender to swing forward, other than Hardwick, because he's been that swingman already, I would have actually said Weddle. But he showed his importance in some more one-on-one roles than in prior weeks, especially with Sicily struggling.
Josh Ward started this game hot and was dang, this guy's going to have to be in the 22 all the time. And then he faded and reminded us why he's kind of a fringe player, but you see the potential. Not a devastating loss for Frio, but one that they definitely should feel like they could have had.
Not the easiest couple games for them at home either. Not an easy end of the road for them in general. Hosting Melbourne, then Western Derby, at Essendon at Marvel, hosting Geelong, the Giants actually at the Showground, and finishing with Port.
Yeah, they're going to get a lot of attention in the coming weeks from us. I feel like we talk about them a lot to begin with, but this remaining fixture I think should be really fun. Sydney 2018-138 defeating North Melbourne 9-5-59.
So that's 8 in a row for the Swans head-to-head and 11 out of 12. Yes, we think back once again to the interchange breach last year. It was never looking like an interchange breach would be required for anybody to win. North would have needed the old head count rules, and Sydney kept the right number of players on the field anyway. It was tight after the first quarter, just a 2-point margin. North had a couple chances early in the second, but consecutive misses from Nick Larkey really stand out in the long run as the Swans proceeded to kick 7 goals to 1. And it could have been even more damaging. They kicked 7-6 in the second quarter. Dominance through the middle, a down game for North in a lot of respects. After, 6, I'd say, solid performances in a row, you knew that there would be some sort of letdown there. This margin was actually bigger than either of us expected, 79. The Swans, I think, were a bit too cautious early on, not really taking on the quarter as much. When they started answering North's pressure, which was hot from the beginning, that's one thing I like about North. They aren't afraid of just bringing the heat right away. But once the Swans answered that, and they tried to cut through it and punish by kicking more aggressively, that did open up the game for them. Through the middle, Chad Warner had a much more odd week in terms of actual ball movement, a bit of inaccuracy toward goal, but he was clearly one of the 2 best players of this game, the other being Errol Goulden, racking up 41, along with being a contested leader, really strong at being able to get out of contests and free up passages on the wing. And he did stay on the wing, even with Callum Mills playing largely opposite him on the other side. So this game marked the return of Callum Mills, easing back into things there, and then Luke Parker with a couple goals, the first of which was his 200th in the AFL, VFL suspension.
Golden did lead in score involvements and had 15 inside 50s, but also still 8 turnovers and efficiency below 70%, even with about 2/3 of his disposals uncontested. Would you still make the case for him as best on ground?
That's a really tough call. I'm going back and forth in my assessment. It's clear that they're the best 2. I said that already. The coaches agreed. They both got 9 votes. I think in terms of per disposal damage, I might give the edge to Warner, but also the Swans tend to send greater numbers through the middle. And I think Golden, even though he took on a lot of difficult contests, might have created more winning possessions and winning passages than Warner did. Warner seemed to be more in the middle of things or toward the end, whereas Golden, I think, started a lot more. I think I might still lean a bit toward Golden.
Champion Data prefers Golden of the 2. However, can you guess who they have as the best player?
I believe it was Tom Papley who kicked 4 too. He had never kicked 4 at the SCG before. And I like Papley. He's got the ability to start plays and put on smart kicks as well. And
he also loves a celebration.
Yeah, that was said right at the beginning with his first one. And I think his second as well. I think his passing ability is still underrated. His kicking to set up is really strong, and it often gets overlooked because of his goal-scoring ability. But also, the Swans' goal-scoring has been incredibly distributed this year.
Credited is only 1 assist. Golden, 3 assists.
That's another one there. The Swans have 6 players with 23 or more goals this year, and 5 with 28 or more. The 6th is the suspended Isaac Heaney. Tied with 28 are Chad, Logan McDonald, and Will Hayward. Tom Papley's got 30, and Joel Amarty, with 2 more in this game, it's still buoyed by his 9 4 weeks ago, leads the way on 34. It's rarely ever the same person really stretching out ahead of the pack in terms of actual goal kicking for the Swans from one week to the next. I think that makes the defensive matchups against them pretty difficult at times. I will say, Callan Dawson being put up against Tom Papley was a mistake right away, and Luke McDonald switched onto him in the second half and did limit him. Luke's one-on-one abilities this year, I think, have gotten more focused because he's pressed into that more since the departure of Ben Mackay. We'll see if that sticks once Griffin Logue gets back, because Logue has some one-on-one ability, and he could be coming in as soon as this coming week, potentially.
Do you have a polished turd pick?
This is one of the most difficult ones. I think I'm probably going to lean toward Luke Davies-Uniacke, because when North were able to get things going in the middle, it was either him or Simpkin, and Davey Uniacke had more involvement and I think a bit better impact per touch as well. A pretty clean game from him in terms of low turnover numbers too. That would give him, I believe, his leading 5th vote. Other than Davey Uniacke, I would put Simpkin up there. Not really many others. Nick Larkey had 3 goals, but had some pretty important misses as well.
Zerhar not efficient enough?
I think that's it. I did like Zerhar being able to occupy Nick Blakey, though. It was a quieter game for Blakey as a whole, especially in the first half. They ended up canceling each other out a decent amount. Blakey didn't get on a lot of those lizard runs. The meterage he gained was mostly from long kicking, and Zerhar did beat him in a couple one-on-ones as well. I might have him kind of in that second or third range there with Simpkin, but I think LDU probably gets the edge. Thinking lastly just about how you might want to match up individually against Sydney. After a 41 touch game, obviously the attention's going to go on Errol Golden, but his motor is so strong, just freakish endurance, that it makes him an extremely difficult tag. I want to see teams try to take it to him, though, and the way to do it is to split the tag. 5 to 10 minutes at a time, one player, then try someone else on him. I know that's difficult because the Swans can cut you up so many different ways, but Golden has faced so little direct opposition this year that I want some team to try this. Western Bulldogs 14-16-100, defeating Carlton 12-14-86. How do you feel now about the Bulldogs going into the Geelong game?
Less scared because, again, never count on this team to win or lose 3 in a row.
Good crowd for this game, over 45,000. We also had an unused sub. Riley Garcia, the 3rd unused sub of the year.
So this was one of those where he was a late inclusion, and I think their logic was, okay, because he's not in there to begin with, and we threw him in late because of a calf injury to Adam Treloar, who we'll see if he's a go for this week. We don't know yet. It was like, we're only going to have him in there in case someone gets hurt, and nobody got hurt. I need to go back and watch this game more closely. I slept a little through like the second quarter. By the way, I watched this game and all of our Friday, Australia, Saturday games from Morro Bay, which was really nice. It was my stopping point on the way to a wedding in Santa Barbara. Really fun weekend. Morro Bay's a cool little town. Part of what I would compare to Australia's Great Ocean Road, you know, with Highway 1 and 101. So if you ever get the chance, highly recommend. Also, I really want to do the Great Ocean Road at some point. Jeremy Cameron driving along there got me hooked. But this game, it was weird because the Dogs kicked no goals, 7 in the first quarter, and then 7-2 in the second. My overarching takeaways from this game, I have much more in the way of overarching takeaways than finer details. But it was a really good game for depth for the Bulldogs that ended up beating out a really good individual Carlton performance, which is usually it's the other way around, where it's the Dogs who don't have the supporting act and are relying on, you know, high-end talent to get them across the finish line. No, this was the other way around. Patrick Cripps was awesome in his 200th game and seems like a pretty good polished turd pick, maybe even get into the votes. He had the 3rd most coaches' votes, while Bailey Dale and Jamara tied for the most.
And Jamara didn't get off to the greatest start either, but bounced back for 4 goals and helped set up a couple as well. I remember he also set up a goal for Riley West early in the 4th quarter. I continue to sing Riley West's praises.
West with 4, Jamara with 4, and an assist.
It's about damn time Riley West has been given the green light to stay in the 22 because he could fix a lot of problems that the Dogs have.
And he's been able to play with some consistency.
Cody Waitman was back from his groin injury and took a really impressive mark, but didn't have as much impact on the scoring end. West is able to provide another small pocket option. Plus, he can be one of the depth runners with the midfield. You need the depth players to run with the top 3 or 4, and we haven't seen that enough. And he could take on some defensive forward responsibilities as well. He did a lot of that earlier this year. In the past couple weeks, though, West has had 2 4-goal games, which he's never had before. Already career highs for games and goals for this year. And I think my sleeper pick from the start of the 2023 season is looking very, very strong now.
But it was a mix of West and Ugle Hagen stepping up to lead the forward group, and a really nice game from Lockie McNeil, who ended up with only 12 disposals, but got a couple of assists. 4 score involvements felt like more. And it's just like, we've always been waiting on guys like him to step up for the Dogs. And in this game, he did that.
Thinking about what the Blues were missing in this game, who was left out of the side yet again?
George Hewitt.
Who crushed in the VFL, and Nick Negropontis is on board with us. Hewitt should...
I mean, the midfield wasn't so much why they lost this game.
Hewitt is just a clean operator, and having him in there could open up Cripps' game further and open up things in general. I like how he's able to look laterally, and that was missing a bit for the Blues. Yes, it hurt that Mitch McGovern was out as well, injured hip flexor. Caleb Marchbank wasn't able to hold his ground, and that would...
Caleb Marchbank really struggled, which sucks because he's a guy you gotta pull for.
That's going to be an easy swap, though, when he is healthy again, McGovern. Injury also to Zach Williams is a real downer with how well he'd done swinging into the forward spot. I imagine this would open up a spot for Jesse Motlop.
I would hope so. And I think as much as I've liked Williams' actual offensive work, I think Motlop will be an upgrade because he'll add more pressure. I would get David Cunningham back in there to help the defense. And I think the glaring issue for Carlton is, once again, they give up triple digits. And another poor game for Brody Kemp, who continues to struggle with opposing talls. Jordan Boyd wasn't especially great either, but I think Kemp has been a massive liability. And it's like, with these other defenders struggling, why is David Cunningham not in there, who I think does the little things really well?
Well, Cunningham is less of a one-on-one defender, but I think could be a really strong substitute option, if not getting time at halfback in the first place. If he can't step up in terms of one-on-one, he'd be a pretty obvious solution there. Kemp was my sleeper pick for this year and had a good middle part of the season, but has tailed off a bit as of late.
Marchbank and Kemp really exemplify the issues that this team had defensively.
You can only ask Jacob Wiedering to do so much on the talls when he's only one person, and Jordan Boyd is strong enough on the smalls for the most part that you can't take him off of that.
Charlie Curnow is one to mention.
A Peter Sumich 3 goals, 7. He got a number of shots, created a lot himself, but because he missed so many, he's much more focused than he would be if, say, he kicked 3-2 or 3-3. I think Danderfield made this point.
I'm fine with that. And I don't take that line of thinking, but it wasn't like he was missing the most difficult shots, which was very strange, very unlike him. And again, I'm not someone who says, oh, it's worse to lose in the finals than, lose in the first round, like idiot NBA logic.
Yeah, the Mavericks would have felt better had they lost to, who the hell did they play in the first round? Was that the Clippers?
You see, that logic's stupid, but Charlie Curnow effectively left 35 points out there.
And there were a couple cases where he took the shot as opposed to seeing runners on either side of him. People have been talking about his selfishness for a while. And in this case, it did come back to hurt the Blues. Suddenly, they've dropped 2 in a row, and the rest of the pack is closing in on them a bit.
Normally, I'd back him in to take those shots. But, once you've missed a couple, I feel like you got to do something to create for other guys.
Don't worry, he'll come back with a bag this week against North.
Oh, he'll be fine. Although Charlie Combin could give him some trouble.
I look forward to that potential Charlie C matchup. The Bulldogs' depth is a strong indicator. They are still, though, in 10th. Of course, that's only a win out of 4th, and they could get there and they could get close to that based on their percentage, which is just about 115. Their next 2 games, though, road tests at Geelong and Sydney. They will need that depth again in major ways. Adelaide 10-11-71, defeating St Kilda 5-9-39. Looking at these teams and looking at the weather, I would almost think this was a Cairns game. And I know you have been starving for Cairns games. You know what else made this feel like a Cairns game, Ethan?
Riley Thilthorpe.
Riley Thilthorpe, the super sub. I guess it worked in the rain to not have a bunch of tolls early on, but he kicked 2 goals from 7 and showed why he should not be in the sub role again.
Holy shit, he's huge.
Giggity.
This was a somewhat entertaining first half, 35-31, and then the rain really started to pick up, and it just got ugly. The Saints not only held to 1 goal, but a total of 3 scoring shots in the second half.
The one goal was a spectacular one, though, from South Australia's own Matthias Philippou, one of the best of the round, kicking on the left side with the left from beyond 50.
I'm glad that Philippou has been such a positive impact the last couple of weeks. I haven't been as huge of a fan of his performance as a lot of other people, but I'm still just happy to see him even proving like, yeah, I belong in the lineup. Because it had been rough for a while, and we were worried about like Ross Ball sucking the life out of him and him needing to get out of there. And now he's found ways to impact the game outside of the forward 50. The positives for the Saints kind of start and end with him, Cooper Sharman, and I guess Nazaya. And Hunter Clark was pretty quality in the middle. But, a week ago I had said, like, this isn't a great midfield, but every now and then they'll have their moments. This was a game where it was like, yeah, this just isn't a very good midfield. And they just got totally outdone. Sam Barry was really good. I liked Lachie Scholl a lot. I liked Rory Laird.
I think people have underrated how smooth of a player Scholl could be. And that stretch into the forward third, he could both set up and get on the end of plays.
When I think about Lachie Scholl from this game, I think of him racing forward and beating everyone and taking a mark.
Those are the type of plays that the Crows have been missing on the middle to tall end, I think. That sort of link up and aggression there because they've got the tall horses for it in Fogarty, Phil Thorpe, to take them into that next kind of generation of their list. You got Riken and Rochelle on the smaller end. Obviously, no Riken for this game, but we're thinking 2025 here. It's that mid-size, though, where Scholl is impactful. You could even call him a bit more on the smaller end, I guess, because he's 6'1".
I think of him as being like lower to the ground altogether.
I think he's just very willing to work below his knees.
Ross Lyons smashed a phone a couple times in this game, so I guess that's noteworthy. It was kind of funny.
And then tried to put it back together and just looked really silly.
Ben Keys getting involved in the second quarter was a good spark for the Crows, because they were actually down a couple goals on a couple of occasions in the first half, and then he ended up getting a goal and then nearly had another, but his soccer went just left. But it was one of those, again, you got to take advantage in what was at that point a pretty evenly matched game. When you have the upper hand, you got to take advantage. And he did that, and that was a turning point. I had actually wanted to be the one to take this game. I had said, I picked this one out a few weeks ago, in part because it was kind of a sickos game, and in part because I just thought a lot of different outcomes were possible. The conditions definitely didn't help, but I'm glad I watched this live so I don't have to go back and rewatch it, because it was rough. Second half was really rough.
So in terms of the sparks for this game, Scholl threw out in terms of playing cleanly, and Keys is willing to work in the rougher situations, so it's no surprise that the rain doesn't bother him. He's a tough player to end up placing, though, because he can be pretty versatile. Last week we think about how he had his scoring performance, but also really could have been used to tag Lachie Neale. So do you give Keys a forward spot at the start and then try to move him if he doesn't get hot? What's the solution there?
I think he's just one of the many that you can rotate between the midfield and the forward half. I think just the best thing to do is include him in that rotation.
Him, Riken, Rochelle, Scholl.
Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did.
How did you know that number, Ethan?
Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters.
Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. No fancy software needed.
It's so easy you can edit it while drunk.
And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do.
Best of all, it's completely free.
Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint.
Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
If you are just joining us for the first time, give us a follow on Twitter at Americans Footy. We're also on Instagram and YouTube and stuff. You might be here because this dumbass who you can find at Benjamin HK01 is going to walk from San Diego to Los Angeles. More details will follow with that shortly. I'm on Twitter at Castle Media, and my son, the executive producer, is at Cat Named Brian on Instagram.
So this was a bet I made about the Swans and Saints game last week. However, I just saw someone online betting their first and second born over Clayton Oliver being an All-Australian next year. So
There was also a guy who bet he'd drink a schooner of piss per day, I think.
yeah, because Isaac Heaney was suspended, doesn't look like he's following through. He has not posted since. He will pay. He will pay. But I'm actually following through on shit. I make a bet, I stick to it. I guess Clayton Oliver could be a bit of a transition into this next topic, although I didn't think of him as one of the starring performers per se, as Melbourne 13-6-84 defeated Essendon 10-7-67. Though overall, the midfield of Melbourne beat Essendon, and they did it despite not getting ruck service from Max Gawn because, well, he didn't play. He wasn't able to walk this week. So how did the Demons do it? Well, firstly, they read Sam Draper's taps really well. Jeff White put out one of his, very good ruck and stoppage analysis videos on it. It was Trent Rivers who got out of the gate with 12 touches in the first quarter that really took the responsibility for not having a direct opponent at stoppages, but rather keeping his eyes on Draper and reading his forward taps a lot. I think Draper needs to learn to vary things up a bit more as well. He's got the strength to, slap things ahead like Oscar McInerney does, but that isn't always the best situation. And maybe that's also a reason why Essendon have had some trouble in the past few weeks converting off of some of their hit-out success. Overall, though, I think this game really hinged on Melbourne pressuring and Essendon not being able to respond to it, because Melbourne's style favored more one-on-one matchups and direct kicking, and they won those one-on-ones. I think that's also a much more reasonable style to take on in wetter conditions. Jake Melksham was matched up against Ben Mackay, did a decent job on him. I think Mackay, though, was still one of the stronger full game performers for Essendon. Stephen Mayne limited Nate Caddy. The real strongest 1v1, though, was Judd McVie, keeping Jake Stringer goalless while being a really strong contested player as well. That is McVie taking his game to the next level in front of a sizable audience, too, on Saturday night. In terms of TV and also in terms of people, still had nearly 53,000 at this game, despite the rain.
Most of which made sure they were undercover. It seemed like the conditions didn't have as much of a bearing on this game as they did on the second half of Crows and Saints. Would that be a fair assessment?
It would. I think it definitely had an effect, though, on the first half and Melbourne just being able to assert their style from the start. They also got stoppage success when Draper's taps weren't as strong or when they had some rarer ruck wins. They were plus 14 in clearances, and I believe the scoring from stoppages was 28-14, and that was furthered by their ground ball gets, as well as Alex Neil-Boland doing an excellent limiting job on Zach Merritt. Ethan, how many clearances did Zach Merritt have?
I'm going to say, without looking, 1.
You looked.
No, I have not. I literally just opened up the page now.
Neil-Boland had 6, and Merritt had 1.
Wow.
And Melbourne took that success at stoppage, combined that with keeping a number on the outside, taking, not too much open space a lot of the time. They like playing on the skinnier side of the ground, but a lot of the time that was Ed Langton on the southern wing. And Langton had one of his most effective and most active games, a goal from 31, and he never left the ground because that's just what he does. Langton and Caleb Windsor, who played on the more open side, combined to outdo Nick Cox. I don't think Cox is really that natural of a wing in the first place. Maybe it's time for Xavier Dersma to get back to more time there. And defensively, they kept that player on the outside as well because that was one of McVie's responsibilities. He would play down the line, push Stringer out of the middle where he so often likes getting overlaps of those bigger runs.
It looks like it was a mix of Van Rooyen and Petty in the ruck contest for Melbourne. Is that correct?
It was largely Van Rooyen succeeding from the second quarter. I think at this point, Harrison Petty's spot is untenable. Not showing use as a tall forward, not useful in the ruck. When Max Gawn is healthy, I would take Harrison Petty straight out.
So from what you're telling me, it seems like Melbourne just did a really good job adjusting to life without Max Gawn, and they were really well prepared for this game.
They were prepared for life without Gawn. They were prepared for the weather conditions in the first half. And they kept up with some of the defensive forward and pressure jobs as well. I mentioned Melksham Bailey Fritsch did that from early on also. So that's another tick there because we'd seen Fritsch be able to do that really a couple weeks ago against Harris Andrews when he alerted a lot of people to his ability, and Simon Goodwin has run with that.
That is impressive and surprising because you think of Melbourne as such a rigid team, and then, all of a sudden, you don't have your two best players, one of which is pretty much completely irreplaceable.
No Gone made up for that. No Petrarca made up for that as well. Neil Bowen doing the defensive job. Clayton Oliver was challenged by the coaching staff at quarter time and responded well. I don't think I put him in the top 5, but a positive performer overall. The best midfielders were Neil Bowen as well as Rivers. Quieter second half from Rivers, but a tone setter. And Kazi Pickett hugged through the middle as well. Strong game for him in his 100th.
I'm talking about 100 games. That's hard to believe. I would have thought he would have been more around 60.
I'll say it again. Kazi was part of that 2019 draft class along with Trent Rivers and Luke Jackson.
I just think of Rivers being so much younger.
Rivers has played 94. If he stays healthy, he'll tick off 100 this year as well. And the fact that it was Rivers, Pickett, McVee, Windsor, Disco Turner kicking 3 that lifted in this game. The younger players doing that, along with Van Rooyen stepping up in the ruck, despite having a strongish forward outing the prior week. I'm encouraged by the younger part of Melbourne's list being so successful in this game. Meanwhile, for Essendon, this is the second week in a row where they didn't really adapt to the weather conditions or the opposition game plan. They naturally couldn't get their quick transitions and power runs in the rain, and the forwards had off nights as well. Peter Wright only got 1 kick from 8 disposals and was held scoreless. He was subbed out. You could consider that a you suck sub potentially. Nick Martin wasn't put forward until the 4th quarter and did kick 4 goals. Interesting ending to this game. The Demons went up 84-43 with under 11 minutes left after Bailey Fritsch beat Jordan Ridley, as he'd done really all night, and kicked his 3rd goal. But Essendon clawed back 4 goals late, and that's definitely a big factor in terms of percentage. I'm not sure how to assess that. Slightly shorter weeks for both of them, and I think that could particularly hurt Melbourne as they're going on the younger side. But the most important thing is they got the win, and they are in, believe it or not, 8th. It took them a bit to adjust to life post-Petrarca. They've done that. Trent Rivers has been a huge factor there. Oliver's better. Neil Bowen can put on the defensive work. And the younger players are taking more responsibility all over the Oval. Challenging end to the season coming up for them. At Freo this week is a big start to things there. They return from the West to play the Giants at the G. Then the Bulldogs, Port, at Gold Coast, and we know what that means. And round 24, I'd imagine they could open round 24 with that Collingwood fixture.
Nick Martin, was he as good as the numbers suggest and the votes suggest?
You could consider him for the polished turd off just 1 quarter, but it was also after Melbourne had gotten out to their big lead. That's a tough call there. I think it's more of a case of Martin's play advocating for him to stay in that half-forward spot.
Next question. Will I enjoy watching this game?
I think you'll moderately enjoy it. Closeness of the first half plus the runs in the 4th quarter. I think you'll learn a lot from this game. I don't think it would be the most enjoyable rewatch of the round, but I think you'll get something good out of it. Essendon, by the way, happy Friday nighter this week against Adelaide. These are must-win games coming up for them against the Crows and Saints.
Weird couple of Friday nights we've got where it's games that were already weeknight games once this year. Essendon Adelaide already was a Friday with the notable finish. And then Carlton and Port was a Thursday, and that'll be a Friday.
I mentioned Gold Coast as hosting Melbourne in round 23. Well, based on how they've done in their first 9 home games, cracks knuckles.
The mighty Sun.
Congratulations to the Suns on their first ever home win over Port Adelaide and snapping their 14-game head-to-head losing streak.
Now every team has beaten every other team in the 18-team era.
I mean, they had already beaten them in the 17-team era, which of course gave birth to the famous Port Adelaide versus the bye. So with that, what is now the longest head-to-head winning streak?
Is it Geelong and Essendon?
It is Geelong. It is not Essendon. That is only at 7.
Sydney and North is at 8 now. Is it Geelong over North?
Yes, at 12. The second longest streak, the only other one at double digits, is Melbourne's 11 straight wins over the Suns. Now, there are plenty of long streaks with one team at home, most of which are Geelong.
But Gold Coast, 14-12-96, defeating Port 12-10-82. I would say fuck yes, but also I'm just fucking disappointed in a couple things regarding the Suns from this game in terms of conduct and penalty. Should we save that for later and talk about the overall game events first?
I mean, I have watched none of this game. Literally none of it.
All right, then.
Other than one clip that led to a suspension that is about the only thing I can weigh in on, but I'm just guessing the Suns midfield bounced back. It looked like, Noah Anderson got 10 votes. Here's a fun coach's vote thing from this week. The only games where someone got 10 votes were the 3 Sunday games. The leader had 9 in all of the Friday and Saturday games, except for Crows Saints, where Ben Keys led with 8.
I am fully in agreement on giving Noah Anderson the 10 votes. He was physical from the start.
So I am guessing that Anderson and Rowell and not Tuke Miller outclassed Butters, Rosie, and the horny one.
I wasn't as drawn to Rowell's game. I think Sam Flanders played a nice supporting role, but it was Noah Anderson driving so much of it.
Why was the horny one limited to 9 disposals?
Okay, so this is part of the peculiarities of this game. He was sent forward for a decent amount of this game, and that was triggered by the second Port injury of the proceedings. In the first quarter, Lachie Jones got concussed on a tackle by Alex Davies. Jones put his head over the ball. Davies charged in. Did not look good from the start. I'm surprised it's 3 games instead of maybe 2, but you can get how the suspension is warranted. So Jones was out. That brought Frank Evans in. Okay, Evans can be a versatile enough player, and I thought he had a decent enough showing as the sub.
I don't think this one should be 3 games. I don't know if that should be anything. That's just unfortunate. And Jones made the mistake of putting his head over the ball.
In line with other suspensions in the year, the onus is on the tackler, but I think also putting the head over the ball needs to be disincentivized.
I mean, does Davies have any time to react? Davies did the right thing by protecting himself and keeping his head out of it. What is he supposed to do differently?
Michael Christian probably has the answer. Why Horn Francis had so much forward time, though, was because Todd Marshall then got hurt as well. He injured his hip because Charlie Dixon fell over him on the ground. Even before Marshall got injured, I did not like Port's forward plan. They were dumb to continue looking so long with their tall stocks depleted. Remember, Mitch Georgiadis was out via suspension.
Also, you're facing a defense that has Sam Collins, who, when he's on, is really good.
And Collins was on this game. Some people had him in vote territory. I would have him either down bound in the top 5 or just out. You could make a case for him to go higher, though.
Coach's votes, he ranked 4th best with 4. He might have just gotten a solo 4. I'm not sure.
I could see Damian Hardwick doing that, honestly.
I think
Collins and Powell were the most successful defenders of this game. Powell, in terms of upfield impact, propelling play, and getting on the end of one himself, his absence was pretty noticeable while he was serving his suspension for being an idiot. So you got Collins and Powell there. Charlie Ballard's still perfectly cromulent interceptor a lot of the time as well. No Georgiadis. Jeremy Finlayson is lazy. Ollie Lord is inexperienced. Charlie Dixon looked closer to a potato than the best 23 of any club in the first half. Did have a decent second half, with some marking and scoring. And then Todd Marshall did his hip, and they still continued to look long and high. You've got the running ability. Use it.
And what you've got with Collins in particular, you've got to make him move around.
He's not the least mobile defender in the world, but got to make him move. You got to test him more at ground level. And Port didn't. They just didn't. The Suns were more damaging at ground level. They also spread out more in the third quarter. They used their speed really well, and they were also really effective from turnover in this game as well. I noted at one point, 11 of their 13 goals by three-quarter time off of the turnover. That's simultaneous praise for Gold Coast's rebound and indictment on Port for not looking for the more sensible options. Now, Port led this game at quarter time despite 8 front half turnovers. I was okay with them looking for shorter kicks on more moderate angles from the back, but they went away from that somewhat after quarter time, and it coincided with the Suns' better passages themselves.
I'm guessing Ken Hinckley was catching a lot of crap from the online crowd then.
This is a Ken out sort of game here, and I completely understand why.
Man, I wish I could have experienced this live, but I was doing alcohols.
Yeah, you were celebrating your friend getting married.
Yeah, which, having now been to a grand total of 2 weddings, drinking on someone else's dime is really fun. Highly recommend.
I think Port's got the capability, though, to run on the outside. You've seen them be able to push outside more. They didn't respond well for much of the game, though, to the Suns crowding the corridor. I would say Butters was Port's best, but he also got heated, and that was detrimental to his game, and Jason Horne-Francis even more so. Horne-Francis gave up, I think, a 50 and then another free kick later for just throwing guys down in more defensive situations. Ports needs to work with those 2 players on managing their temper. The coaches need to be in on that. Therapists need to be in on that, because the ceiling is obvious. But when they get rattled, even the floor can crumble beneath them. Another reason why I'm critical of Hinckley, despite not being able to control, the players actually turning the ball over on the oval a lot, was that the defensive matchups did not change and they looked wrong. Ben King versus Brandon Zerk-Thatcher.
Seriously, you guys? The fuck?
Have you learned nothing from his time with Essendon? Brandon Zerk-Thatcher should not be matched up against opposing talls.
He shouldn't be matched up against the number 1 tall. That had to be Alir's responsibility rather than Jed Walter. I know you're scared about Walter's physicality. He can injure anybody without even trying.
That's all the more reason to not put Alir on Walter. We've seen how much this team has suffered when Alir has gotten hurt. Thank you. That's just stupid. So am I going to be entertained watching this game, or am I just going to be more aggravated?
¿Por qué no las dos?
What was the emotion like in real time?
Honestly, I was cheering for the Suns, so I was happy aside from the 2 suspension-worthy events. I really am a fan of a lot of people on the Suns team and the way they went about this game in general. The crowd was into it. They had 14,500 there,
I was just going to comment on that. That's a step forward. And when we compare it to their expansion partners, they're doing better. Was it decent amount of Port fans, or was it like a Suns crowd?
I think it still leaned Suns, honestly. They were definitely louder because they were in front for much of the game.
You know what's funny? Here's a quick other Suns fan thing I wanted to talk about. I've noticed when they've played at Marvel this year, I don't know how many of their fans are, how many of those are just expansion fans, how many of those are Suns fans, how many are just people fucking around, but they've been the most fun fans. After their first goal in that awful game against the Saints, they had streamers and confetti and stuff. A couple weeks ago against North, they had guys in banana suits for some reason. And then the Suns cheer squad at People First is just some people with flags.
And I think a snare drum in there as well. I think in terms of that one-on-one, Hinckley was probably thinking, he did well on Max a couple weeks ago. Max King was injured, you fuckwit. And from the beginning, it was obvious. I noted at least 4 1v1 wins for King against Zerk-Thatcher, where he managed to mark. Those resulted in 2 goals and 2 doinks, and the doinks did not prove costly. Now, about that one final thing for this game and why this is rage-inducing for me. So you see players get 3 games for hard tackles where the head might not even be the principal point of contact, but concussions result. Mal Rosas runs by Logan Evans, elevates his arm, elbows Logan Evans in the back of the head. No concussion, which means just 1 game. Rosas should be shut down for the rest of the fucking season for shit like that.
Okay, maybe not for the season, but at least a few games. Guys, the off-ball incidents that have nothing to do with the game are the easiest to crack down on, the easiest to prevent. There was the one down in the twos a couple years ago where Ben Brown only got 2 games for punching a guy in the
I forget. I think that was a 5-match suspension that he got reduced to 3 on appeal. But it's blatantly clear. The AFL is in it to protect themselves from lawsuits. No concussion. That player won't be involved in class action. We don't need to suspend.
How many games would he get if Evans had been concussed?
3 or 4, which is manifestly inadequate in and of itself.
So fucking stupid. And I like Malcolm Rose
If you're getting
a lot, and like people have lapses in judgment and do stupid shit, and this is not going to like overwhelmingly change my assessment of him.
Rosas had a nice game on return too. That's what makes it all the more frustrating.
Like, look, I'm not going to completely like change my assessment of Mal Rosas unless he does more shit like this. Because, you know, I think of like players that I think of with that, like, you know, Peter Laddams. It's because like he did that sort of stuff all the time. You know, if it's a one-off, it's not going to change my assessment of his character, but he should be getting suspended a lot more for this.
If you're suspending Alex Davies and, well, 2 other players that we'll talk about from the Sunday games, 3 games for those sorts of tackles where it's on the ball, their intent is not to concuss, you should get Rosas out for the rest of the season, if not longer. Imagine how much this would get in the NHL.
Well, no, in the NHL, it's entirely dependent on what team you play for and what team you do it against. So let's...
NFL then?
I mean, I'm trying to think of how that would even work because, you know, they wear helmets.
Okay, I'm thinking back to Albert Hainsworth III ripping off Andre Giroud's head and stepping on it with his cleat.
And that was like before all the concussion stuff really took off.
That was 2006. Hainsworth was suspended for 5 games, which is quite long in the NFL considering back then that was just a 16-game season.
Yeah, like now that would get you like a full season.
It should be 10 for Rosas. Richmond, 12-12-84, defeated by Greater Western Sydney, 17-6-108. This game started with an excellent Giants banner. Dusty, we love you. Hope you're on the up. Might see you next year in the Expansion Cup. And while the Tigers did challenge the Giants for much this game, GWS did have the upper hand throughout. Fine game for Toby Green, where he'd been challenged by some defensive one-on-ones this season, so bit of a bounce-back performance for the captain there. And some of the same players as before, fueling their attack, particularly Finn Callahan.
How did this guy get left out of the coaches' votes? Like, he does things that coaches love. That one really surprised me.
Finn Callahan plays high ally, confirmed.
I was really impressed with him once again. Like, he really affects the game through the middle. He's like a main artery.
Finn the Aorta Callahan?
Like, he's such a good balance of a high volume and high impact per touch guy. His 6 score involvement seems low, but I guess when the team only had 23 scores, that does have something to do with it. I thought the Giants, yes, they did end up having really good kicking accuracy, but they were mostly just hitting easier shots, and they definitely did still deserve to win this game.
I know that they lost on the expected score, but I do agree. This felt like a game that, by and large, the Giants controlled. And I think Callahan's role has been more magnified in terms of starting and adding to movement on the outside in the absence of Josh Kelly. And I hope that's not something that the Giants take away from him once Kelly is back in. I also know Steven Canelio is a bit of a watch for this coming week, so maybe an even more magnified midfield role for Callahan could be on offer. It could be really him and Xavier O'Halloran.
I think the expected score that you were mentioning might have also been altered a bit by a couple of late Richmond goals, because the Giants led this game by 37 early in the 4th. You know, normally I am someone who does not like high volume, low efficiency games, but I actually really liked how Tom Green played, which is weird because normally if a guy has 37 disposals at 40.5% efficiency with 10 turnovers, I'm not impressed. But I thought he was still, like, even with that, clearly the most consistent, like, defining presence in the middle. And a lot of the turnovers were, like, you know, some low percentage disposals to begin with, where it's a tricky situation that you probably weren't going to get a lot out of. It wasn't like he was just, you know, ignoring or missing open men. He had, like, 1 or 2 legitimate skill errors, but I thought he was pretty solid and was probably the best overall midfielder in this game, unless you qualify Callahan as midfielder.
Tough opportunities for connection, getting the ball out of congestion, but maybe not to an immediate player. I can understand that sort of thing. I think in terms of the greens in this game, you'd obviously rank the one with the extra E highest. then Tom, and don't want to forget about Steely, who kicked his first goal for Richmond.
Didn't just kick his first goal, kicked his second and his third as well.
I am so happy that he's getting opportunities for multiple reasons. Firstly, his name is Steely Green. That's the second best name on an AFL list. Secondly, he wears number 48. Only one other player in the league currently wears that. Thirdly, just a great story. Talented sailor in his youth for Western Australia. But after being struck by lightning and only being saved because of the rubber boots his mom had just bought for him, switched over to Australian rules and got the hang of it pretty much immediately. Also, I believe the name Steely comes from his parents' love of Steely.
That is correct. Broadcasters did make like one Steely Dan reference at some point. I think it was a reeling in the years reference. I don't remember. That is very.
I was going to say like reeling in the goals or something after he kicks his third.
I think they just said that like he'll be reeling in the years for the Tigers. I don't remember. If we're ranking all of the dad music, I mean, the all-time number one dad song is The Joker by Steve Miller Band. I'd put Reelin' in the Years up there. I'd put Listen to the Music by the Doobie Brothers up there.
This was the Giants' first ever win over Richmond at the G. That's notable.
It's also notable that Richmond won the fourth quarter because they had lost the prior 16 quarters. Player who I had been pretty critical of for a lot of this season that finally responded, Harry Himmelberg.
Harry!
Easily the best game he's played this year. Good job moving out of the back. Good job in one-on-one contests. Looked like he belonged in the back line and just kind of helped things flow. Like a really good sequence that would start from the back with him, and then you'd get like Lockie Ash or Finn Callahan, and then that next stage involving Tom Green. Like he was an important part of the progression. Also, I thought Toby Bedford was awesome. 13 tackles, made life difficult for Tim Taranto, who did get 27 disposals, but had to earn every little bit of that and was limited to 106 meters.
Okay, let's hold up here because one of those tackles.
Yeah, Toby Bedford tackled Taranto. I mean, he didn't have to run far, but it was a chase down tackle. Taranto's head hit the ground, which was completely independent and inconsequential from Bedford's actions, and yet Bedford gets a 3-game suspension, which is bad enough on its own. And then when you compare it to Mal Rosas getting 1 game, like this is just fucking insanity, man. And I really don't think Bedford did anything that caused Taranto's head to hit the ground. I think it was very much just an unfortunate coincidence. And for him to even get a 1-game suspension would be rough, but 3? Like, what the fuck is he supposed to do? Are we supposed to start playing Sarcastaball? Like, I do think...
Speaking of...
I do think he'd be really good at giving compliments to his opponents. I think all the players wearing, like, newspaper hats and bras would be a pretty fun gag. And it would be cool, you know, for a marketing line for Butter's Creamy Goo.
This is cum.
This is maybe the least justifiable suspension I've ever seen. I mean, he kind of wrapped him around the elbows. It wasn't... I wouldn't call it so much pinning the arms, especially considering Taranto still had his hands on the ball. This is such a shit suspension that if somehow it holds up,
it will.
I will use my executive privilege by the powers invested in me by me that this will not make him ineligible for America's Brownlow.
Should we say the same for Alex Davies?
If they were to say, yeah, he pinned the arms 1 game, okay. I wouldn't be happy with it, but I could live with it. But 3? I mean, this is really bad. Crowd barely cracked 19,000, which is a little depressing considering... Remember a couple years ago, Richmond were like trying to set like an attendance goal for each game? Other brief notes to wrap this up. Jack Graham was tagging Stephen Cornelio before he got hurt, and I thought Graham had a really good game pressure-wise, and, you know, I'll wait to see your evaluation, but he's my pick for the polished turd. With respect to Steely Green, Tim Taranto, and Dion Prestia, I thought Jack Graham was the best Tiger around. And then for the Giants, Darcy Jones, less involved, but still just his presence and them scoring 100. Those things are not independent of each other. And Aaron Cadman was more involved. Was he great? No, but you remember, you know, he was getting subbed off, getting dropped to the 2s. He got himself more involved even when he wasn't on the receiving end and just finding a way to impact sequences as a tall full forward.
Now, you are willing to use your executive privilege for Toby Bedford. As we transition to the final game of the round, West Coast 14-993 defeated by Brisbane 16-10-106. I would like for you firstly, Ethan, to evaluate Charlie Cameron's tackle on Liam Duggan that resulted in a 3-game suspension. The Cameron tackle did not look great live. I instantly thought, that's a game.
Yeah, in real time, that does not look very good. I mean, if we talk about like the sort of stuff that gets like a roughing the passer penalty, where it's like, what's the term about, like, putting your weight onto the quarterback or something?
Well, Cameron definitely did drive him into the ground when it wasn't necessary to hold up play.
Yeah.
Duggan, though, has had concussion history.
I could see this as 1 game, not 3.
I would be fine with seeing 10 games of suspension total for this round. I would just like to have all 10 of those on Malroses.
Again, I think the Davies one is really tough to punish. Bedford, 1 game at most. This one, I'd probably give 1 game, but I could understand 2. 3 is ridiculous. But it seems like, and again, I have watched none of this game yet. Over the next couple days, I am grinding through a bunch of games I need to catch up on. You don't seem miserable. You don't seem depressed. Which reminds me of
I am not.
A Canada baseball game made up one of my favorite chants of all time. Have I ever told you about this?
How recent was this?
I want to say 2018 or 19. I think 2019. The kid kept chanting, "Let's boo Rangers, get depressed." I don't know. There's something really funny about like a, 9-year-old kid yelling at a bunch of adults to get depressed.
I'm not depressed. The Eagles stuck with Brisbane for much of the game. The skill gap was apparent. Of course, you don't go in expecting to beat the team in the hottest form in the league. And now, having won 6 straight, they are in the top 4 where they belong. But the Eagles adjusted from prior weeks. And unlike any games before this, effort was there from the start. Firstly, just want to say the club did a good job sending off Adam Simpson. He was able to address the crowd before the game, thank them, and toss the coin and kind of did a marmalade with the coin toss as well, which got a lot of laughter, especially from Liam Ryan. And then Simpson went up to one of the boxes to watch the game, along with, I think, some board members, including Justin Langer, and also a bunch of the 2018 Premiership team. Even Willie Rioli was there because he wasn't playing for Port that day.
That's really neat.
I think Willie...
I guess some Port fans were heated over that.
I think they were, especially because they could have used Willie. I think another reason why, I think Willie also really wanted to be there because the game was also Liam Ryan's 100th, and those two are quite close. And Ryan did a decent job for himself. Kicked a couple, including one right on the final siren to decrease the margin to 13. Had some run from the middle at times. He and Cam Rayner for each side were pushing into the midfield to start the third quarter with good impact overall. The Lions did increase the margin from 10 to 28 by 3-quarter time, and I never had the feeling that West Coast was actually going to win this game, but they approached this game much better. Firstly, the list decisions were a lot more sensible. For the first time after 293 AFL games, Jack Darling was just straight up omitted. He actually played in the waffle and helped the Beagles beat West Perth.
I had never heard the term Beagles before this week, and I think it's funny.
I'm not sure how widely used it is, but it totally fits. Campbell Chester had been down on form. He was omitted. Jeremy McGovern, for him to even get to Perth in the way he did in time for the Simpson presser was crazy enough. We talked about that in the preview. Josh Rotham finally dropped. Harry Edwards came in, looked like he fucking belonged in defense. I don't know why it had taken so long for Edwards to get in, for Merrick to get back in. Not the greatest game for Merrick, but showing his worth on the outside. For Zane True to finally fucking get back into the 22. First time since round 6 of 2023 that he has been in the 22. And he was one of the higher pressure players in this game. Dude's got to stick around, got to sign him and Harry Edwards up for longer terms. Harry, True, and Jack Williams all showed clear reasons to stay in. Williams was in the 18 again, thank goodness. And Jack Hutchinson also pushed into defense a lot to impact plays. Got on the end of his first AFL goal. Also a nice check side one too. I wish Oscar Allen had done more of the first 3 quarters to be involved in the fuller field play. He ended up kicking 3 in the last, but could have been used more elsewhere earlier on. So that's a gripe there. However, Brady Hoff, gotta mention him because other people are taking notice again. Second time in a row, he has held Charlie Cameron without a goal in their one-on-one. Cameron kicked a couple, but neither were against Hoff, and one of them was off of 50 anyway. And Brady Hoff got 3 coaches' votes. He got 2 in the media at the GABA last year as well, where he would have clearly gotten the polished turd vote there.
Was that a triple-digit loss?
It was an 81-point margin, 116-35.
Okay, so I just checked, and no, there was never a triple-digit margin. I think that one in the 80s was the biggest. And I feel like we've just had a chain of Eagles trips to the GABA that were just like, yeah, they're going to get blown out, and I didn't watch them, and you did.
Well, the 2021 game had impact because that was what got the Lions into the top 4 from what I recall.
And then they went out in straight sets,
D's and Bulldogs.
Gotcha. Anyway, I like the coaches' votes for this game. Not only is it a great distribution where the only agreement was that Lockie Neal was the best. Was that, by the way, is that your assessment as well?
Absolutely it is.
Maybe you should tag him.
He and Hugh McCluggage were winning from the start, shocker, and Neal was the cleaner player as the game went on. He's also started to kick some more goals in past couple weeks as well, so as if he wasn't scary enough before, he's been more accurate in front of goal.
Have you considered tagging him?
The Eagles don't have a great tagging option is the other thing.
Lockie Neal in particular is a guy who's shown, he struggled with tags. So that's one where I would honestly just, even without having like a certifiable tagger, like just throw somebody on him because at the very least, you think you got a good shot to get under his skin.
It's tough because I would think of a guy like Zane True who could pressure really well as the right type for that, but he was important in terms of some of the midfield passages. Also, I would almost want to see if someone like Jaden Hunt could just run with him.
That would work. Or what about Ruben Jinby?
Jinby is the other one, yeah. He's been thrown around so much this year, and I think Jared Schofield is really trying to commit to trying him out at halfback flank for at least a couple weeks. We're thinking big picture here, obviously, and I think the Lions still would have found a way to win had Neal been tagged.
I would like to imagine, like, I'm coaching, and I'm standing there on the sidelines, and I just tell someone, hey, go chase that guy around, follow him. Say something mean about his tattoos. Like, literally just be a dick to him.
Apart from the midfield trio you'd expect, solid game both in the middle and forward for Cameron Rayner. He's got an argument to get in the Brownlow votes for this game. Zorko and McInerney could get down balanced stuff in terms of Zorko's sweeping and starting attack and McInerney's hits being effective all game. I also want to credit Brisbane for matching West Coast pressure even as it got into the 240s in the second quarter. This was a skill gap. It was going to happen. The Lions have won 6 straight. They're 8-1-1 in their last 10. They're in the top 4. And they have a mammoth game Sunday afternoon.
Looking at this game, I think now I can say I am glad that Adam Simpson is now no longer coaching because he can be associated more with positive stretches of Eagles football instead of these last couple of years. I hope he becomes a media personality because he seems really fun. I've said that about multiple coaches, like Ken Hinckley, I definitely said that about as well. Ross Lyon, I think, has already had some of that experience.
Yeah. I want Luke Beveridge to be snatched up by Fox Footy.
Like, Nathan Buckley is intelligent, and I like his analysis, but from, like, an entertainment perspective, there are other coaches I think would be, like, awesome for this. I think Dimma would be great. But, yeah, I guess that's it for Adam Simpson. It's got to be quite a different place with him gone, that's for true. All right.
Going over the awards.
Let's start with Mark of the Week.
Yeah, I think for both awards last week, we each picked one of the other nominees. There weren't any real standouts, I think, on any of them, but the Mark of the Week winner in round 17 was Kasi Pickett over Josh Rotham. Solid, clean mark.
Your round 18 nominees are Jamie Elliott over Lawson Humphreys. I mean, it was kind of like half behind, half over him. You had Cody Waitman getting his knee onto Tom DeConing's shoulder, and he stuck the landing. Hang on, sorry. I mean, he didn't stick it quite as cleanly as SpongeBob when he did the full banana fudge pop with 2 sticks.
Almonds? Curse him, that's good.
But it was pretty good. And then Bailey J. Williams over Oscar McInerney, but that's a nominee. I feel like there had to be something else better. Very unimpressive. Not a knock on Bailey Williams, but like, it was a very, very standard mark, a very unremarkable mark. But I'm ranking these Waitman, Elliott, 50-foot drop, Williams. Last week's goal of the week was Kai Lohman, who picked up the ball out of a tackle, dropped it onto his boot, and dribbled it home through a crowd. It was one of those, like, you didn't really realize it when it happened, because it happened so quickly.
Don't think this week's crop is that great. Your round 18 nominees: Saturday evening, Bailey Dale spoiled a Jordan Boyd kick, got an overlap with Jack McRae that sidestepped Boyd and kicked from the low to mid 40s. Then Matthias Philippou that night grabbed off the front of the pack, ran to 52 on the left side, and kicked a one bouncer with his left. Saints have a couple of real strong left-footed kicks there between him and Ari Schoenmaker. Hopefully they can make something out of that soon. And then on Sunday, Jesse Hogan got a crumb in the left pocket, put on a slight feint. He split Tom Brown and Ben Miller and finished with the right. I think I'm putting Philippou over Hogan, but not by a huge amount.
I'll go Philippou. Overall, this was a Shania Twain crop of nominees.
Didn't impress us much.
But I'll take Philippou.
As we've discussed, we're giving Michael Christian the main character nod for this week. He might not be the main driving force behind the suspension protocol, but the buck stops with him. And instead of being a clean stop, this is much more than, getting a can opened at the Gregson Street guillotine. This is awful. I'm hoping you all understand what I mean by the Gregson Street guillotine.
I don't, and I'm not going to.
The can opener bridge, like the old 11-8 bridge in North Carolina.
Oh, which is actually not far from where Major League Cricket is being played right now.
Oh yeah, I guess that's in the research triangle, because I think it's a Duke faculty member who set up the cameras. But the MRO decisions were farcical at best, and we're going to be clowning them even more when they don't get changed.
This whole thing is a travesty and a sham and a mockery. It's a Travis-shamockery.
No making up words.
Burgle-flickle.
Hopefully this has been thorough enough for you. I don't think we missed anything. As we get toward round 19, are we in the pointy end at this point?
Yes, I think it's pointy enough that you need to wear gloves.
A reminder, find me individually on Twitter at BenjaminHK01. Find him at Castle Media. His son, our executive producer,
he's sitting next to me. His name is Brian Harambe. He's on Instagram at cat named Brian.
We're at Americans Footy on a bunch of platforms, and I imagine a lot of people are coming from Twitter if they're new, just because of my bet and just outspokenness on there a lot of the time, particularly mine, I'd say. It's discourse, I'll say that. It's discourse.